The dim pre-dawn light filled the room as Tommy woke up. Rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he opened them as his active imagination took flight. Turning towards his mother, who was fast asleep on his left, Tommy was just about to perform his daily ritual of jumping on her until she awoke when he saw something move out of the corner of his eye. Slowly, he swiveled to face the dark, shadowy corner of the bedroom. Over the sound of his parents' steady breathing, Tommy could hear a third set of lungs, inhaling and exhaling. To his horror, the shadows were no longer static. Before the child's eyes, out of the darkness, something emerged. Hearing their son screaming, Tommy's parents awoke with a terrible shock. They stared in groggy confusion in the direction their son was pointing, but they could see nothing at all. Eventually, they tried to convince him to go back to sleep, talking soothingly about nightmares. The horrifying truth hit Tommy in that moment. Neither of his parents could see the monster, which meant they couldn't save him from it. The next day, Tommy had almost forgotten about the monster as he wandered around the park. This was the first time he'd begun to feel a little calm since the trauma of the previous night. He was almost about to return to where his mother was sitting when a sudden loud growling stopped him in his tracks. Standing in the middle of the path, its sharp teeth gleaming, was a large, ferocious looking dog. Growls rolled like thunder out of its gaping mouth. Tommy had been terrified of dogs since as long as he could remember. If the monster hadn't been standing equally menacingly behind Tommy, he would have turned tail and run out of the park a long time ago. But he knew what the monster wanted him to do, and he was equally reluctant to do it. With the monster's watchful eye on him, the boy noticed that the furry little creature was wagging its tail, and its eyes weren't vicious or angry. Rather, they were brimming with a kind of infinite joy. Encouraged by this, Tommy tentatively reached out a hand towards the dog. He was immediately rewarded with a flurry of wet licks by the excited creature, as it pressed its body against Tommy's knees, begging for more affection. Delighted, he glanced back at the monster and suddenly noticed that its horns were no longer wickedly sharp and pointed, and on its face was an expression that almost looked like a smile. Over the next few weeks, Tommy couldn't help but notice that the creature was growing ever less intimidating, but the child was still wary of the monster that followed him wherever he went. Soon, Tommy's parents decided that their son needed to sleep in his own room from then on, like a grown up. As the storm raged outside, Tommy's parents tucked their terrified son into his own bed and kissed him good night. Sitting alone in his bed, the boy was wide awake, trembling with fear. Tommy hated everything about storms and was always scared that the thunder might break down the roof. Tommy would have run to his parents' room and woken them up if he couldn't see the disapproving look the monster gave him every time the thought crossed his mind. So when the thunder boomed, Tommy would whimper in fear and burrow further into the covers. Suddenly, he felt something climb onto the bed and wriggle under the blanket. Looking down in amazement, he realized that it was the monster, cuddling against him like an oversized teddy bear. The little boy wrapped his arms around the monster and hugged him close. As he dozed off, he realized the monster had turned pillowy and soft. As time passed, Tommy lost all fear of the monster. He began to realize that perhaps the monster didn't mean him harm after all. Gradually, he had become Tommy's constant companion and source of entertainment. One day, having just finished grocery shopping for the week, Tommy and his mother were walking back home. Glancing over his shoulder, Tommy made sure that the monster was there, and sure enough, there he was, trotting along behind them. When his mother stopped walking abruptly, Tommy looked upwards and he saw an unfamiliar woman smiling down at him. Immediately, he darted behind his mother and hid behind her legs. Peering cautiously around her, Tommy realized that there was a child with the woman, a little girl about his age. All of a sudden, Tommy felt something tugging on his shorts and he glanced down at the monster, who was trying to get his attention. The creature gestured towards the girl, indicating that Tommy ought to go and speak to her. After a considerable amount of encouragement and cajoling by the monster, Tommy was finally convinced to venture out from behind his mother and approach the little girl. Glancing repeatedly backwards at the monster for reassurance, Tommy crossed the distance between him and the new girl. Slowly, he held out his hand like he had seen grown ups do. To his surprise, the little girl accepted his hand with her own and shook it up and down. Filled with confidence, Tommy began talking to the girl, and within minutes the two were jabbering away at each other. The monster stood at a distance, watching the two in silent approval. As the bond between the two children grew, the monster began to fade, until finally, where it had previously stood, there stretched only the empty street, and the monster became nothing more than a memory.